Factsverse presents 54 years after a mom vanished without a trace, workers made an astonishing discovery in her yard. In 1964, a retired police officer named Therese Rocco lost her friend and neighbor Mary Arcuri. She vanished one day, leaving her husband and children behind. It was believed that she had fled because of a troubled marriage. She lived in a two-story red brick home on Black Street, which is located on the northeast side of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It would be 50 years before anyone would ever find out where Mary went. In 2018, the house where Mary lived was being renovated. Mary's family no longer lived in the house, and the new owners were planning an extensive renovation, which included restoring the backyard. They were digging up the backyard to build a new deck when they came across human remains. The workers came across a makeshift grave February 28, 2018. The discovery stopped the renovation project in its tracks. 54 years after this mom vanished without a trace, workers made an astonishing discovery in her own yard. The workers called the police just after 9:30 a.m. after finding the remains. When they arrived on the scene, they looked at the remains to determine how long they'd been there. They realized that they could be linked to Mary, the woman who'd gone missing so many years earlier. They reached out to Therese, who had been on the case all those years ago, and they thought that she could help to identify the remains. Back when Mary lived in the house with her family, Therese lived nearby at 5445 Black Street. She remembered Mary and her family well. She and Mary shared a special bond. When Mary had one of her children, she arrived at Therese's door with the tiny baby in her arms. She asked Therese to be the baby's godmother. Therese says that Mary settled down in the home with her husband and then brought two beautiful children into the world. Shortly after the birth of their second child, Mary and her husband's relationship began to sour, and then in 1964, the Arcuri household changed forever. In 1964, Mary's husband, Albert, claims that she left him. He said that she took all of her possessions but left her children behind. By then, Therese Rocco was a police officer who worked in the Missing Persons Unit. Because Albert claimed that Mary left on her own, there was no real investigation into her disappearance. Albert told people in the neighborhood that he'd been unfaithful, and the neighbors were shocked by Mary's disappearance. Therese couldn't help but think that something was off. She knew that she had to leave it alone, but she never understood why Mary left her children and never tried to reach out to them. A man named Charles Saberna grew up down the street from the Arcuri's family. They lived in another unit at 5445 Black Street. He says that he and his mother often talked about Mary and knew that something sinister had occurred. Around the same time that Mary left, Albert built a terrace on his property. That caused gossip in the neighborhood, and many people believed that Albert had killed his wife. Since they were just rumors, though, and there was no concrete evidence of foul play, the police never investigated further. For 5 decades, Mary's disappearance remained a mystery. When Therese got the call about the remains discovered at the Arcuris' old home, she was shocked. As soon as Therese heard about the remains, she realized that the investigators' initial theory was wrong and Mary didn't just take off. Therese reached out to Mary's daughter, her goddaughter, so that they could test the DNA of the remains against Mary's daughter. The results were undeniable, and Therese's hunch was right. It was Mary's remains that were in the backyard, and she'd been there since her disappearance. The police reached out to Mary's living family members to let them know her remains had been found. The family members they informed were disappointed that their older family members who had died went to their graves without knowing the truth. They informed her great-nephew Charles about what happened to Mary. He told the police that his great-uncle Albert was a harsh man who hated kids. Others remembered him as a mild-mannered man. Everyone agreed he didn't seem capable of killing his wife. Because Mary's remains had been buried for so long, the investigators couldn't determine the cause of death. There were no visible signs of injury, so that they couldn't deem her death a homicide. Nobody would ever know what really happened, because Albert had been in a deadly car accident a year after Mary disappeared. Albert was 40 when he died, and he took the information surrounding Mary's disappearance with him to the grave. Albert rammed his car on Baum Boulevard into a building. People thought he killed himself purposely because his wife left him, but now Therese believes that the guilt of killing his wife drove him to suicide. The husband and wife were gone, leaving their children to be orphans. That is the biggest tragedy of the story. Subscribe for more.